The black mustang neighed desperately, tied near the slaughterhouse. Victor Drummond didn't even glance at it. He had deals to close. But as he passed the old, faded Dry Creek Ranch sign, something chilled his veins. What he decided to do with that wild horse changed everything forever. Subscribe to the channel and comment below what city you're watching from. Do you believe in second chances? The story is starting now. Victor Drummond adjusted his gold Rolex as he watched his secretary leave his office in tears. 3 dismissals before lunch. A personal record. At 62, the agribusiness magnate had built an $800 million empire by turning sentiment into weakness and compassion into a waste of time. Business is war, he always muttered, and war has no place for soft hearts. The phone rang. His daughter, probably. Victor let it go to voicemail for the 10th time that month. Relationships were unnecessary complications, expensive distractions that didn't pay dividends. He had learned this the hard way years ago. When he lost, he shook his head, pushing away memories he preferred dead and buried. The substitute secretary entered, trembling. "Mr. Drummond, you have a meeting at Dry Creek Ranch in an hour. Cattle purchase." Victor waved her away without lifting his eyes from the screen. 500 more, head for his lands. Simple numbers, guaranteed profits. Exactly how he liked it. An hour later, the silver Porsche cut through the dusty road toward the countryside. Victor detested leaving the city, but business demanded sacrifices. When he spotted the old, faded Dry Creek Ranch sign, something strange happened. His hands sweated on the wheel. That name. Why did it sound familiar? He parked near the corral where Jim, the rancher, was waiting for him. A simple man, worn hat, honest smile, exactly the type Victor trampled over in business. "Mr. Drummond, the cattle are separated. You can check them." Victor inspected the cattle with a clinical eye. 500 healthy head, fair price. Deal closed in 10 minutes. He was signing the papers when he heard a desperate neigh. Across the yard, near a barn that reeked of blood and death, a black horse was tied to a tree. The animal pulled hard on the rope, its eyes wide with terror. Victor frowned. "What horse is that?" Jim followed his gaze and sighed. "Wild Mustang. We caught him last week tearing down fences, untamable. He's going to the slaughterhouse early tomorrow." Victor observed the animal. Glossy black coat, defined muscles, a perfect white star on its forehead. It must have been 8, 9 years old. In the wild for generations, never ridden, never broken. Something in the horse's silent despair bothered him in an inexplicable way. "How much do you want for him?" Jim blinked, surprised. "Sir, but he's wild, he'll never—" "I asked how much." Victor's voice cut through the air like a blade. $3,000. But it's money thrown away, Mr. Victor. This animal is no good for... Victor was already writing the check. It didn't make sense. It wasn't an investment. It wasn't logical. But something in that place, in that horse, in that moment, was stirring a part of him he thought he'd killed long ago. "Send him to my ranch today." Jim took the check, astonished. Victor was already walking to his car when he stopped. He looked again at the faded Dry Creek Ranch sign. Why did that name echo in his mind like a nightmare? He sped off without looking back, but in the rearview mirror he saw the black Mustang, still fighting against the ropes, as if it knew its life had just changed. Just like Victor's. The next morning, Victor was reviewing contracts when he heard the truck arriving. From his ranch office window, he saw the ranch hands struggling to unload a fury of hooves and muscle. The black Mustang burst from the trailer like a storm, neighs cutting through the morning air. "Boss, where do you want this beast?" shouted Carl, his foreman. Victor stepped out of the house. The horse was cornered in the corral, struggling against the wooden fences. Wild eyes, flared nostrils, ready to attack anyone who approached. He had never seen an animal so free and so lost. The back corral. away from the other horses. He tried to go back to work, but his concentration had evaporated. The sound of desperate neighs echoed across the property like a lament. At 2 in the afternoon, he gave up pretending to be productive and went to the town vet. "Dr. Miller, I need you to examine an animal I bought." An hour later, the elderly vet was in the corral, shaking his head. Pure Mustang, never broken. By the state of his teeth, I'd say about 8 years old. Born wild, lived wild. It'll be almost impossible to domesticate. Almost? With a lot of patience, years of work, maybe. But why, Mr. Victor? You have excellent domesticated horses. Victor didn't know how to answer. It really didn't make sense. That night he found himself walking to the corral. The Mustang stood in the farthest corner, muscles tense, ready to flee. When Victor approached the fence, the animal retreated even further. "I won't hurt you." The words came out on their own, surprising him. He stood there for an hour, just observing. The horse did the same, 2 wounded beings studying each other through the bars. The following week, something strange began to happen. Victor found himself being less sharp in meetings. When an employee made a mistake that cost $50,000, instead of firing him on the spot, he just said, "Fix it." His partners noticed. "Victor, you've been different," commented Edward during lunch. "Calmer." He quickly changed the subject, but it was true. Sometimes he found himself thinking about the Mustang instead of business. The animal was still wild, but it no longer fled when Victor approached. They stood there, man and horse, sharing a silence neither of them understood. It was Carl who brought the information that changed everything. "Boss, I talked to the folks over at Dry Creek Ranch about that Mustang's history. Turns out his mother was born on those lands about 20 years ago. The herd always lived around there." Victor felt his blood run cold. 20 years ago. Dry Creek. "Carl, do you know the history of that area?" "Oh, yes. It used to belong to a man named Joseph Drummond. He raised horses, died about 15 years ago. Left everything abandoned until they bought it to turn into a cattle ranch." The pen slipped from Victor's hand. Joseph Drummond, his father. The man he had abandoned, ignored, left to die alone and embittered while he built his empire of coldness. When Carl left, Victor was alone with a devastating truth. The horse he had saved on impulse was born and raised on the lands that had once belonged to his father, the father who died waiting for a son who never returned. Victor drove to Dry Creek the following dawn. He needed to see with his own eyes. The property was different from the last time. Cattle corrals where there had once been open pastures, modern barns replacing old structures. But in the back, almost hidden by tall brush, he found what he was looking for. The remains of the old house, crumbling brick walls, a partially collapsed roof. And there, on the ruined porch, a rusty rocking chair where Joseph Drummond used to spend his afternoons watching the wild mustangs that lived in the hills. Victor pushed the creaking door. The interior was filled with cobwebs and dust, but he still recognized some furniture. On the kitchen table he found a rusty metal box. Inside, letters, dozens of them, all addressed to him. Never sent. His hands trembled as he opened the first one. "My son, today I fed the mustangs again. The black mare had a beautiful foal, black like her, but with a white star on its forehead. It reminded me of you when you were a child and dreamed of having a horse like that. I hope that one day you'll come back to see it." The date, 15 years ago. Victor opened another letter. "Victor, I know you're angry with me, that you think I should have sold everything and moved to the city, but these horses depend on me. They are free, as you always wanted to be. When you tire of chasing money, know that there's a place here waiting for you." And another. "The mustangs are dwindling. Nearby ranchers think they're a nuisance. I try to protect what I can. That foal with the white star grew strong, stubborn like his father, like you." The last letter was dated a few months before Joseph's death. "My time is running out, son. The horses no longer have anyone to defend them. I know you've become a hard man, but I hope there's still something left of the boy who cried when we had to put down the injured mare. If you ever read this, remember, some treasures cannot be bought. Victor let the letters fall. The cold floor of the abandoned kitchen received his tears, the first in 15 years. The Mustang he had saved wasn't just any horse. It was a descendant of the animals his father protected, the last guardian of a legacy he had scorned. His cell phone rang. Edward, his partner. "Victor, where the hell are you? The meeting with the Japanese is in 2 hours. $50 million on the table." "I'm not going." "What do you mean you're not going? We're talking about 50. Victor hung up. For the first time in decades, money didn't matter. He sat in the rusty rocking chair and looked at the hills where one day Mustangs ran free, where an old, lonely man spent the last years of his life feeding wild horses and waiting for a son who never returned. The foal with the white star his father had protected was now on his ranch, as lost as Victor felt at that moment. 2 orphans whom fate had reunited 15 years too late. When he returned home at dusk, he went straight to the corral. The Mustang watched him approach. Victor slowly extended his hand. "Your name is Star," he murmured, "and I should have known your father, just as you should have known mine." The next morning, Victor found a forgotten photo in his jacket pocket. Joseph Drummond at 50, smiling beside a black mare. On the back, in trembling handwriting, "To Victor, some treasures choose you, not the other way around. Dad." The secretary entered the office without knocking. "Sir, your partners are furious. You lost 3 contracts yesterday. Edward wants to talk urgently." Victor didn't even look up. "I'm not seeing anyone today." But Edward wouldn't take no for an answer. He stormed into the office an hour later, red with rage. "Have you lost your mind? $50 million, Victor, and you disappear to play with a horse. It's not a game." "Of course it is. What have you become, some romantic rancher, an animal rescuer? Have you forgotten who you are?" Victor finally looked up. "I remember very well who I became. A man who let his father die alone while chasing money." "Your father was a broke dreamer. You built an empire. I built a prison." Victor stood, walked to the window. In the corral, Star grazed peacefully for the first time since he arrived. "Edward, I want you to take over my share of the business." "Temporarily?" "Permanently." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the phone ringing. Edward looked at Victor as if he didn't recognize him. "Are you serious?" "Completely." That afternoon, Victor was in the corral when Carl came running. "Boss, Star has colic. Dr. Miller is on his way, but—" Victor ran as he had never run before. He found the Mustang lying down, breathing heavily, eyes glazed with pain. Dr. Miller arrived minutes later, examining him quickly. "Severe colic. It could be fatal. He needs surgery, but I don't have the equipment here. Veterinary hospital in the major city, 2 hours away." "Then let's go." "Mr. Victor, the animal is in critical condition. The trip could kill him, and even if he survives, it's $60,000 for surgery. For a wild horse. Prepare the trailer. Now." The trip was hell. Victor in the passenger seat, listening to every groan from the horse in the trailer. He did something he hadn't done in decades. He prayed. Not for money, power, or success. For time. For a second chance to do things differently. In the waiting room of the veterinary hospital, Edward called again. "Victor, investors are pulling out offers. If you don't come back tomorrow—" "Edward, remember what my father used to say? Some treasures cannot be bought. Your father died poor. He died with honor. I lived rich and I'll die empty." He hung up the phone and then turned it off permanently. On the other side of the door, surgeons fought to save the life of a horse that was worth more than any contract. Because Star was the last connection to a man he had loved and abandoned. At 3 in the morning, the surgery ended. Star would survive. Victor leaned his head against the cold wall and cried again. This time, not from regret, from gratitude. His father had cared for that horse's mother. Now Victor would care for the son. It was too late for Joseph Drummond, but not for Star, and perhaps not for himself. 3 months later, Victor was unrecognizable. He sold his penthouse apartment, his luxury cars, his jewelry. He moved permanently to the ranch, transforming the main house into something simple but welcoming. Star was slowly recovering, still wild, but no longer terrified. The first person who came seeking forgiveness was Mary Miller, a 58-year-old widow whose land Victor had confiscated 5 years earlier for a debt of $100,000. She appeared at the gate on a rainy afternoon, thin, grey-haired, with hard eyes. "I came for what's mine," she said bluntly. Victor invited her in. He handed her a plain envelope. "The deed to your land, in your name, no strings attached." Mary opened the envelope with trembling hands. She read it once, twice, 3 times. She looked at Victor as if he were a ghost. "Why?" "Because a horse taught me that some treasures cannot be bought." She didn't thank him. She didn't smile. But for a brief second, her eyes softened. She took the deed and left without looking back. Victor walked down the porch. It was a start. In the following weeks, others came. Employees unjustly fired, small ranchers he had crushed, families destroyed by his greed. Not all accepted his reparations. Some spat in his face, others simply closed the door. Victor learned that redemption isn't about being forgiven, it's about doing things differently. With the money that remained, he created the Joseph Drummond Mustang Protection Institute. He bought back his father's original lands and turned them into a sanctuary. Fences were torn down. Wild horses could roam freely. Veterinarians were hired to care for injured animals. Star was the first official resident, still wild, but no longer alone. One afternoon, he received an unexpected visit. His daughter Carly, 32, was on the porch. They hadn't spoken in 4 years, not since he refused to help her when her husband lost his job. "Dad?" Victor stepped slowly out of the house. Carly looked different, thinner, longer hair, tired but determined eyes. "I heard you've changed, that you're different." "I'm trying. Mom said you sold everything, that you became a horse protector." Victor smiled sadly. "Your grandfather always protected the Mustangs. I guess it's hereditary." Carly approached. "Remember when I was a kid and you promised we'd visit Grandpa Joseph, but you were always too busy?" The memory hit him like a punch to the gut. "I remember. He died waiting for that visit, waiting to meet his grandchildren." Victor nodded, unable to speak. "But today is a new day," Carly continued, "and I have 2 children who would like to meet their grandfather, if he wants to meet grandchildren." This time, when Victor cried, it wasn't from pain, it was from hope. That night, he walked to the corral where Star was resting. The Mustang raised its head, watched him for a moment, then went back to grazing. Trust, hard-earned. "Thank you," Victor murmured to the white star shining on the horse's forehead, "for showing me the way back home." 2 years passed. Victor turned 64, watching Star, now 10 years old, gallop freely through the pastures that had once belonged to his father. The Mustang had gained weight. Its coat gleamed, but it retained the wild essence that defined it. Some treasures should never be completely tamed. The Joseph Drummond Institute now housed 23 rescued Mustangs. Victor had learned each name, each story. He knew their wounds, their quirks, their fears. The work wasn't easy. Injured wild horses took months to trust humans. But Victor had patience, something he had never had before. Carly visited with her children every weekend. Peter, 8, had fallen in love with Star. Sophia, 6, preferred a gentle mare named Luna. Victor taught them about horses, about respect, about patience, the same lessons his father had tried to teach him decades ago. "Grandpa, why does Star never let anyone ride him?" Peter asked one afternoon. Victor knelt beside his grandson. "Because he was born free, Peter. Some beings weren't made to serve. They were made to remind us what true freedom is." Like Grandpa Joseph? Exactly like Grandpa Joseph. In the simple office he had set up on the ranch, Victor kept all the letters his father had written and never sent. He read a different one each night, slowly getting to know the man he had ignored in life. Joseph Drummond was everything Victor hadn't been. Kind, patient, hopeful until the end. One afternoon he received a call from Edward, now solely commanding the empire they had once built together. "Victor, you need to know, Mary Miller, that widow whose land you returned, she opened a rural school for underprivileged children. Using your property, she's making a difference." Victor smiled. Some investments pay dividends in places money cannot measure, but life also brought painful reminders. Dr. Miller, the vet who cared for the Mustangs, pulled Victor aside for a serious talk. "Victor, I need to tell you something about Star. He's getting old. 10 years for a Mustang who lived in the wild. He probably has 7 or 8 more years ahead of him." Victor nodded in silence. He had learned that to love meant to accept impermanence. That night, he walked to the pasture where Star rested under the stars. The horse approached, something unthinkable 2 years earlier. They stood side by side, man and animal, contemplating the nocturnal immensity. "You saved me," Victor murmured, carefully stroking the Mustang's neck. "Not I you. You brought me back home." Star snorted softly as if understanding. Victor thought of his father alone in that same place, feeding wild horses and waiting for a son who never returned. He thought of Carly, whom he almost lost forever. He thought of Mary Miller, transforming pain into education. He thought of himself at 64, finally understanding that wealth is not measured in money. The Mustang was 10 years old. He was 64. In the wild, both would be in the final phase of their journeys. But for the first time in his life, Victor didn't fear the end. He was sure that when his time came, he wouldn't die as he had lived for 50 years, alone and empty. He had purpose, he had love, he had peace. On the 3rd anniversary of Joseph Drummond's death, Victor organized a simple ceremony at the sanctuary. Families who had been helped by the Institute came to pay tribute. Mary Miller brought her rural school students. Carly was there with her children. Employees Victor had unjustly fired and later sought out to ask for forgiveness. Veterinarians, activists, simple people who loved horses. Star, now 11 years old, observed everything from a distance. Still wild, still free, but no longer alone. Beside him, 22 other Mustangs grazed peacefully on the lands Joseph Drummond had once protected alone. Victor stood to speak. There was no microphone, no stage, just a 65-year-old man, gray-haired, hands calloused from ranch work, standing in a circle of people he had once hurt and now sought to honor. "My father died believing in second chances. I spent 50 years proving him wrong, until a wild horse showed me that I was wrong." He looked at Star, who had stopped grazing and was watching him. Joseph Drummond fed the parents and grandparents of these horses for 15 years, alone, without recognition, without profit, because he believed that some treasures cannot be bought, that some things are sacred simply because they exist. Peter, his grandson, was sitting on the grass near Star. The Mustang, incredibly, had allowed the boy to approach. Today, 23 wild horses live free on these lands. More than 200 children study at the school we built with Institute funds. 17 families have recovered their properties, not because I am good, because I learned that repairing the past is the only way to live the present. Mary Miller nodded from the audience. She hadn't fully forgiven him. Some wounds are too deep, but she had accepted the change. Victor walked to where he kept his father's letters. He took one from his pocket, the last one Joseph had written. He wrote, "Some treasures choose you, not the other way around. It took me 65 years to understand. I didn't save Star from that slaughterhouse. He saved me. When the ceremony ended and everyone left, Victor remained alone with Star in the field. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky orange and red. The Mustang approached closer than ever, almost touching Victor's shoulder. "Your time is passing, isn't it?" Victor murmured. "Mine too." Star snorted softly, as he always did. "But we did things differently. Your father would be proud. Mine too." Victor closed his eyes and, for the first time in decades, spoke in the first person to himself. "I can't go back and be the son I should have been. But I can be different today and tomorrow. And for the time I have left." Joseph Drummond believed in second chances. Star gave me mine. Now it's my turn to pass it on. The Mustang neighed softly and galloped toward the mountains where his ancestors ran free. Victor smiled. Some treasures don't need to be owned to be loved. They just need to be protected. This story is about regret, about words we didn't say, calls we didn't make, people we left behind while chasing things that don't matter. If you have someone you love but are distant from out of pride, out of anger, because you're too busy, don't wait to need a wild horse to teach you what truly matters. Call, write, show up. Because unlike Victor Drummond, you still have time. And if this story reminded you of someone, or if you believe in second chances, share it. We never know who needs to hear this today. Thanks for watching. See you in the next story.